Okay.
We need to have cards.
Yeah, try voting cards. Man, I'll wipe that thing.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. First off, we're gonna talk about carbon and nitrogen.
Cool.
And then Johnny's like, we're gonna talk about life. Let's talk about life. And then we're like,
Oh wait.
it is life. Life for a farmer. And
Yeah.
everyone else doesn't realize without carbon or nitrogen, you are dead.
Yes.
Are we made of carbon? Is part of us carbon?
Yes.
How
We have
much?
carbon. Don't quote me on that part.
Do you have a guess?
I'd say
Over 1%?
I would think so. I mean, I eat that much. You know, you think
That's a
your
good part.
Your
a good fact.
carbohydrates.
I mean,
yeah.
air. How much carbon's in the air we breathe? Carbon dioxide?
Yeah. I mean, there's that into the equation.
I
If
don't
you
know.
work out a lot, you know, you're exhaling more, so it's probably, yeah,
Neutral.
probably.
That's a campfire conversation.
let's
Campfire
leave
with
it
Johnny.
there.
That's
Yeah,
right.
let's leave it
Okay.
there.
So we're going to talk about carbon and nitrogen, and we're going to talk about the ratio, and then the importance of carbons in soil, and then carbons with applications in soils when they make sense and when they don't make sense. But first, we have a question. Actually, we have lots of questions. I'm not going to ask that question because that's wildly controversial. But, oh gosh, here's another one. How significant of an economic shift in your operation was banding of fertility versus broadcast? I think that might be...
Okay.
I think that's steered towards me. I think he was asking me this question. Well, I have been able to reduce my P and my K applications and not see any yield reduction by easily 50%. In some cases, I have been able to remove P and K applications and see yield maintained and some increased. It's a very special case, and it is a project to get there. But I'd say out the gate, I've been able to cut 50%. And I'd say I've probably gotten higher than that now. On going into next year, I'm going to probably be 60 to 70% reduction, just because we learn more about quality, how to keep more of it up there. Because if I forget how much nitrogen that we apply in just a dry broadcast form actually gets into the plant. It makes you sick if you start hearing some of the...
Pretty sure the research was like 50% that came out.
Yeah, 50%. That, if that's... Anything else in life, man, we wouldn't do it. If you're like, you're gonna pay for a full tank of gas, and I'm gonna give you a half a tank. How many people are gonna be like, okay?
Well, and I think it tells you too the response to nitrogen is more than just a plant response too.
Absolutely.
I think that needs to be part of the conversation, because sometimes I think of nitrogen applications as a point of almost like an electrolyte boost within the soil.
To soil. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, when we really dive into carbon and nitrogen, I mean, nitrogen's not a bad thing.
No.
It just needs to be utilized, efficiently, so we're not causing
Mass
excess.
imbalance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
on the nitrogen side, I averaged 110 pounds of nitrogen last year applied.
okay,
And my farm average on corn was 156, all dry land. The best, I actually have data. I'll try to pull it up in the next podcast. Kirk, remind me. And I actually did a nitrogen test, 0 nitrogen, 60, 120, and 90 pounds. That's what I did. And the yield response to however much that was. This was on my best ground.
Okay.
This was like this is good stuff.
stuff cycling. Like, there's no
Yes.
doubt.
Cranking.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
literally across the creek from the no nitrogen wheat.
Okay.
It's been the same management. I just rotate it every year back
Okay.
and forth. And so it's cranked. And the I'm trying to think. It's I'm gonna burn too much time if I get up and go get it. But there was a median. More nitrogen didn't help, or more nitrogen helped, and then we got to a point where it was not the determining factor at all.
Yes.
And dude, what was amazing was how much we could raise on no nitrogen.
Yeah.
Like if the ground's cycling, we still raised in this spot. We hit 180 bushel corn. It's like 100. I think it was 178.
Yep.
178 bushel with 0 nitrogen on a half-mile stretch.
On a very wet year. Or
Yes, we had great weather
this year.
We had great weather this year.
Yeah.
And I know other people are going to say 155 bushel farm average on wet year. Oh, you suck. That's this area.
Profitable.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to go too heavily into that.
But no, I mean, at the end of the day,
my goal this year, Heathman and I talked about this on a previous podcast. My goal for that ground was 130, 140 bushel for that farm. And I contracted accordingly because my APH was right there, 130, 140. It made 176 farm average.
Yep.
But the good zone, I tested the good zone in good dirt that's cycling. That's that great soil because people think more nitrogen, because that's what we're going to. Well, how much? I just wanted to see how much is nitrogen the limiting factor here.
Yeah.
How much can we do without it? How much can we do with some? Will a bunch more help us? And that was a fascinating test.
Yeah.
Fascinating to test in balanced, high functioning soil.
Yes.
So, if all the dirt was like that, you would need very much dirt to farm. I have an old landlord that tells me about there's this one field, man, no matter what, it does not matter the year, it's big yield. It's a 28 acre field tucked away in a creek bottom. It's just amazing dirt, protected. It's great.
Yep.
He goes, boy, if a young guy had just 500 acres of that, he could beat all the 2,000 acre farmers every year. Dude, it's true.
100%.
True, man. That'd be a lot less stressful, too.
That was just finding 500 acres of that kind of ground.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
So
that's U.S. military flying over. My house is a turnaround spot for Fort Riley Army Base, the helicopters.
Nice.
So, anyway.
So, if we get a helicopter, I'll probably need to go north a little bit.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah. I know some peeps up there.
Sorry, enough about helicopters.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, carbon and nitrogen.
Yes.
So I guess that's kind of an answer to that question. So banding fertility, how much is, that can segue into nitrogen was a heavy one that I could learn to transition to by testing. An immediate cut farm wide is not safe.
100. Yeah.
Always test.
Yes.
Before you try something large scale, and always be testing.
Yes.
Always be testing. And what I was finding out is different hybrids are responsive to nitrogen in different ways. Because there are guys that are taking old hybrids that are still a good hybrid, and they're more responsive than some new hybrids to nitrogen.
Yes.
And that's not talked about.
Yep.
And so, man, the testing should always be going on. And we're trying to gather more of that data to pass on to guys, just because it's good to know, and that's how you can really sharpen a pencil.
Well, that's where, genetics. That's a whole nother conversation. But with that being said, like carbon to nitrogen ratios, its effect of getting applied nitrogen, definitely where I'm from, where we're split applying, we almost need to know if that plant has no response to later in. Because we need to change our standard practice then.
Okay.
So, that data would be huge. Now, that's a lot of data, too, and how to figure that part out. But...
And then the variances of the year itself, rainfall, heat, everything else.
Yeah. In our situation, I mean, rainwater compared to irrigation water is never the same. Rainwater is always better.
Everyone will tell you that.
Yeah. So, I mean, but we still have irrigation, heavy irrigation.
Yeah.
So... we utilize those for split applying nitrogen. So, I mean, it does change the game for us, though, quite a bit, if that's the situation.
Sure.
So,
Johnny, explain out the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Someone says, what is the carbon to nitrogen ratio? What is it from a 30,000 foot view, and then drop down a little bit?
okay, so I'd start from the very, very top looking down. Carbon to nitrogen, when we talk about that, it's usually about the life within the soil, more times than not.
Okay.
So as you're dropping in, is what type of life form's going to survive in those situations. Okay, so you start really dropping. So it's how much carbon you have to nitrogen. Mm-hmm. Okay. Kind of going in the swing of things. So if you're below 10 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, okay, that's a very tight ratio. Okay. Now I've seen it down to 7 to 1, and that's like, oh no levels. If you get above 8 to 1, bacteria are going to thrive in a tighter carbon to nitrogen ratio.
So just to clarify, a tight would be a 1 in 10?
10 to 1.
10 to 1. 10 carbons?
10 carbons to 1 nitrogen.
To 1 nitrogen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just for bacteria to be bacteria, they need 8 to 1.
Okay.
Okay. And it's just how much food that they get from the carbon versus the nitrogen that's there, because they're going to be using both, and they want balance as well.
Sure.
So if that balance gets too less of carbon, there's not much life going on. It can't support life because there's not carbon there. Yeah. Okay. So you get to that 10 to 1, bacteria is starting to cook more. You get to 12 to 1. There's enough food source for that bacteria to do its thing. Then after that, you get to your fungal. So fungus needs a 24 to 1, so it's a wider ratio. Wow. Okay, that's where it thrives in. Okay. I'm not saying that there's not certain species that can handle lower, but they thrive in that 24 to 1.
Yeah.
Now, one thing to be very careful about, though, and this is where we get to farming, strictly farming. Okay, if you get up to a 24 to 1. There could be a chance that bacteria now is not feeling as hunky-dory. So now it's going to steal nitrogen. So inside of that bacteria to be balanced, needs to steal nitrogen from the soil instead of steal carbon, because it has abundance of carbon. Okay. There's more levels. There's more microorganisms we can talk about. But at the end of the day, with most farm ground, I haven't seen it above, that 15 to 18.
Okay.
So let's focus on there below. Okay. That's how I feel.
So is bacteria and fungi... Is bacteria and... Kirk's having a spaz attack back there.
Yeah, it's all good.
Is bacteria and fungi, are they working together or not? Two different families needing the same food but at different amounts. And how do you... Sounds like what's good for one is not so good for the other.
Well, and I think you can talk like Regen Labs doing their PFLA tests. Just what is your ratio between fungus to bacteria?
I need to do one of those.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of paints a picture, you know. And what I mean by that is it's letting you know. I mean, it's just like cover crops. The more diversity of life, the better off it's going to be. There's more synergies with having both. With that being said, most of the time I strive for 12 to 1.
Okay.
If you get up to a 15 to 1 when it comes to row crops, I start paying attention of like, okay, we need to tone back a little bit, because if you get above there, there's a chance that you will still nitrogen. Like
toning back on the carbon?
We got that in check.
Okay.
I mean, that's where it needs to be.
Sure.
So then when you're applying nutrients, applying nitrogen, that carbon to nitrogen ratio tells you, do I need to split apply? Or can I put more up front and save a pass?
Sure.
And that's where you get into the more carbon you have in your soil, you can tie nitrogen and you can tie up phosphorus. I shouldn't say tie up, but they come together.
Hold in availability.
Yeah. So then the plant's able to take it.
Okay.
So like I said, I strive for a 12-to-1. And once we're there, you can put a little bit more up front and be okay. But the moment you drop by 10-to-1, you're at a situation there that you need to split apply.
Okay.
Because if you front load in that situation, you're going to crash that system. Because most times producers are going out there and they're putting, let's just say, 150 pounds of N. They just go out there and broadcast it at the beginning of the year.
I'm printing out my region test.
Oh, sweet.
So I can pull it. So I can, because there's a C to N ratio on here, right? Yes, there is.
There should be. Yep.
I was just like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to print it out. So this is the no nitrogen wheat field that people have heard me beating a dead horse. Which actually, when this podcast dropped, we'll have had a podcast that talked about when my wife's uncle chopped the legs off a frozen horse with an axe. But yeah, you have to listen to the podcast if you haven't. It's a great story. And this was taken in February, end of February.
Yeah.
So on here, on the region test, I would just go off of this. So my carbon to nitrogen ratio is
13.4.
I have no idea what that means, Johnny. But that's where I want to be?
You're in your zone. I mean, that's where I would feel great.
I'm in the zone. Maverick told me I'm in the zone. I can die a happy man.
Well, and one huge thing on this, and this is why I like Haney tests, is that organic nitrogen.
Okay.
Okay. If you take a traditional soil test in that water extraction zone, if you take a traditional test, it's just going to tell you nitrate. So, like on here, on this Haney extraction, it says that you have 3.5 parts per million nitrate.
Okay.
Okay. If you saw that number and said you only had 6 pounds of nitrogen out there, you'd be like, okay, we got to compensate.
Sure.
Right? But then you go over, you look at this water extractable, and
Which
it says
one's that?
It says H2O extraction, and then underneath it says ORG nitrogen parts per million N.
Okay.
On the top.
Yep.
That's 14.9. Let's call it 15. Okay. Take that times 2. That's 30 pounds.
Yeah.
In an organic form. So it means it has carbon tied to it.
Okay.
This is where you're seeing your benefit of your carbon to nitrogen ratio. You said this is a field that you didn't apply anything to. Okay. This
has been my baby for the last, this is the first field Ben started helping me on.
Okay.
So this is we're going into year 5.
Okay.
Of really intense. I say really intense. Really intense sounds like we've done a ton to it. We've been much more specific in the applications that we decide to do to it.
Yes.
And had cover crops 2 of the years, strip tilled,
okay.
Corn, bean, wheat rotation,
okay,
with cover crops mixed in there.
Okay.
So.
Hey guys, Ben and Josh here. We've been doing a blog once a month, kind of help us express out exactly how we work through problems on a monthly basis. And
it's pretty real life. It's dealing with real life problems
yeah.
on the farm. Typically, it's a vent session in short form. So, you want to check it out? Links in the description.
So, 30 pounds of N right there with that organic nitrogen source. And what's nice about that source?
So we multiply that by 2?
I guess I was assuming, 0 to 6. Sorry, that's just...
Oh, thinking 1 to 12. In the top 12 inches?
Well, it's just... So, it's pounds.
Okay,
gotcha. It's just a easy way to say roughly how many pounds are out there. Now, there's fine-tuning there. I just use that because it's simplicity, simple, replicate, go.
Got it.
But with that, so 30 pounds of N, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's saving money. That you're not applying, right? Not only that, though, is you're not over-applying, throwing the system out of balance.
Right. And then you cause more other problems.
And also the benefit of that is that when it's tied to carbon, it's almost like a nitrogen inhibitor.
Okay.
It's going to slowly release. Biology is going to eat the carbon, poop out the nitrogen, and your plant's able to have it.
Okay.
So, that's a huge difference right there. But with that carbon to nitrogen ratio, one thing I think is interesting, and this is one thing I love about Regen Labs tests, is they tell you cover crop suggestions.
Okay.
And the reason why is that you get to your legumes, okay, which is part of why soybeans, okay, have a very low carbon to nitrogen.
Yes, here we
Okay.
Let's go.
They are narrower. They're tighter in their carbon to nitrogen ratio.
In like their usage?
In the sense of, instead of like corn stalks being a 60-1, that's a wide spread.
That's a wide spread.
Okay.
Because it's tons of carbon?
Yes.
Just because it's so much mass.
Well, yeah, and it's just how the plant builds itself.
Okay.
I mean, if you took soybean residue, corn stalks, and then a tree branch that you shredded,
Okay.
and you just sat those in a field,
Sure.
which one's going to disappear first? Soybeans. Good job, Josh.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. I'm like, dude, this is a trick question. This is a trick question.
No, it's not though. But I mean, those soybeans have a narrower carbon to nitrogen, so they're closer together.
Okay.
So that means bacteria can process that carbon really fast.
Okay.
Okay, because it's more in their balance of that 8 to 1, 10 to 1.
Okay.
Okay. Then you have corn that's 60-1.
Okay.
Okay, and that's why when you do corn on corn, traditionally you add at least 20 extra pounds to help break that down.
I see, because you have so much carbon.
You have so much carbon that you have to narrow up that ratio. So then your biology can start cooking, start processing faster.
So that's why they say I put more in on corn.
Yes.
Because to offset so much carbon.
Yes.
And so you can have too much carbon in a field?
Well, it's just timing of it.
Okay.
Okay, so like you have all this residue in the spring.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been worked in. It's just kind of sitting there, right?
Sure.
If you go and do a nitrogen application of your traditional and you're not adjusting for corn on corn, okay, Mother Nature, biology, all that eats first.
Okay.
So that first 20 pounds that you put out there is for the biology. It is not for the plant.
Okay.
It's for that biology to start breaking down that residue. Well, you
It's
get
like the cocaine.
yeah.
That's what Ben calls it.
Yeah, okay,
That's cocaine
okay.
for biology.
So I get to the point. So later in the year, now you're 20 pounds short
Okay.
because the biology took their share
Sure.
just to help get everything back into balance. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just it goes back to that ratio. The moment you get above that 24-1, end mobilization happens with nitrogen.
Okay.
So that's why some people get burned with cover crops.
Yeah.
Okay. It's amazing how much the carbon to nitrogen ratio changes as the rye grows.
Really?
Amazing the difference. I've actually
Interesting.
slightly changed my opinion on letting rye get
So big.
yeah. Just because of the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Or however you kill
I
it,
when
let me
gets
know.
This big.
That's great because that's at 30-1.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And the only reason I was doing it is because by the time I plant, I still get my ground cover.
You're still getting roots pretty far down with that kind of growth.
You do, yeah. It's before it starts sending the stems up. If it goes bigger than that and it kills it, then I fight with that. Then it lays down and it won't dry if we're wet because it's a mat.
Yep.
And it's still enough growth. It's jointed and all so that it doesn't just immediately just disappear. Because otherwise, if you kill it too early, it's just gone.
You're telling me that you've actually seen carbon to nitrogen ratio in real life?
I guess
That's
I have.
what you just said.
I
You're telling me it
yeah, I
disappears
have.
when it's
Of
shorter,
course.
and then when it's way tall, it
It
takes
doesn't go
forever.
nowhere. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, you already knew. Why am I here?
Because I didn't know. I didn't know that I knew. I'm the village idiot.
No, you're not.
Oh, thank you. I just didn't have a clue that I knew.
But no, I mean that's why my opinions have changed.
Right.
You know, I like carbon.
Well, and it's safer because I don't use if I let it get big, right up to planting where we live, we can be wet or we can be real dry, and that can change in 10 days.
Yeah.
And that pulls moisture out to where I can't germinate a planted seed.
Yeah.
Or it can be very beneficial and hold moisture if the seed's germinated and the cover crop's terminated at the right time.
Yes.
Anyway, without diving crazy into cover crops, but yeah.
But no, I mean, but that's a huge part of cover crops is your seed-in ratio that you're gaining from it.
Right. And there's a lot of guys, inexperienced guys. I was one of them. I'm still not an experienced cover cropper. I've learned how they fit into my organization or my operation, used to cover crop a lot of ground, and then I got burned on some of it, and I noticed the ground that it helped, and the ground it didn't do a whole lot for. And then I was like, okay, what do I want to do with this cover crop, and treat it just like a tool?
Yes.
And now I use it on my highly erodible ground. When I do, any kind of dirt work just to cover the ground. I mean, if I'm trying to boost biology in a field with low biology, I mean, just different things. I'm not a cover crop expert. We have guys that are so good in cover crops. I've just found where they fit in my operation currently. Does that mean I'm going to, and we implement some grazing, even though I hate cows, but that's okay. Let people who love cows do cows. And, but I don't know. I've also seen the benefits of grazing a piece of ground, using cover crops, implementing livestock. I think that has great benefit if used properly.
I'm just going to say another podcast, and let's focus on.
Yes, carbon nitrogen. Sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So, and then I'm looking at the one of the last sample IDs I pulled was on May 16th on this, and my C to N was 12.85, so 2 points down. So the wheat was headed by then, probably pollinating.
Okay.
At that point.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, it just tells you biology was using it.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, it's one representation at any given moment.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Sure.
I mean, I don't sit here and when I take soil data, I don't say, well, this is it. I mean, you got to be realistic about it. So,
Sure.
It could have been just where you pulled from too. But still, 12
Right.
12 to 1, still pretty happy there.
With that. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're looking for that 10 to 15.
Yeah, and I would say 10, we're starting to have conversations. Like, hey, how can we get this higher? But if we're above that 12, I feel very comfortable.
Okay.
And then if you get above that 16 to 17, we just have to change management a little bit. In the sense of maybe applying more nitrogen early.
I was going to
A little
say
bit more nitrogen.
to break some carbon down.
Yeah. Yeah, or you have that field that's like 17 to 1.
Sure.
Throw some soybeans on that bad girl.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so explain. Here's a question that I got in regards to carbon nitrogen. Beans behind corn, why do they do better? Beans on beans on beans continually get worse.
Yeah, so in that situation, another thing that's changed my perspective. I used to really like a 1-year rotation. Then I found out the power of carbon. So you think about carbon to nitrogen ratios again. So corn stalks, 60 to 1. Soybeans, I want to say they're like 23 to 1, the actual stalks of it, but all the leaf material is really low, really narrow. That's why it gets eaten up right away. I mean, it's just done.
Gone. Yeah.
But as that process is going on, that plant, so a soybean plant's producing nitrogen through its nodules. It has a very small carbon to nitrogen ratio. Soybeans need so much more nitrogen than corn does.
Okay.
To get relative bushels.
Okay.
So in that situation, there's an overabundance of nitrogen in the system, not enough carbon to support it. So the bugs, if you want to call them biology, is eating up the carbon that was in the reserve to try to get that balance again, because they want balance. So for them, always processing that residue as fast as possible, trying to get as much carbon as possible. Once that residue is gone, there's no food. So then the biology slows down. Okay.
It's probably the wrong time. Grain production.
Well, and I get to the point of, you talk about year after year after year. Well, you ran out of carbon, let's just say at R7, right at the very end, year 1.
Sure.
Year 2, maybe it's at R5.
Okay.
Year 3, it's at R3.
Sooner,
And there's
sooner.
there's no scientific. I'm just saying relatively. Like, think of it that way.
Yeah.
Of why, like, soybean on soybean on soybean.
Sure.
Also, I get to the point of soybeans love available calcium. Calcium is so important, needs to be talked about more. But when I say in the point of plant available calcium, okay, not just pH, not just base saturation, like Haney test, how much calcium is actually getting released. But soybeans are going to utilize that.
Okay.
Professor Albrecht, in one of his studies, he did a pH of 2, like pH of 4, pH of 7, so on and so forth, and put soybean plants on it, seeing how much pH influenced it. But not only did he do that, he inserted available calcium on a replicated trial.
Okay.
And soybeans still nodulated at like 4 pH.
Wow.
With plant available calcium available in the solution. If you didn't have that in the solution, there was a drag. I mean, there's still a drag because that's a low pH, but it's the idea of that bacteria was able to survive as long as you have plant available calcium releasing in your soil.
Got it.
That's why I think, they talk about alfalfa, they talked about these legumes liking that higher pH. Is it just because there's more plant available calcium, so the biology feels happier and they're able to process what they should process?
Interesting.
But when you do year after year after year of soybeans, you're going to lose out on calcium, you're going to lose out on carbon. And what are the two elements that we talked about last podcast that help fluff the soil?
Calcium and carbon.
So it's dropping that. So I like 2 years of corn, 1 year of soybeans.
Okay.
Because of everything I just chatted about.
Sure. So really on a corn year, we see an increase of carbon. And
Yes.
on a bean year, we see more nitrogen with carbon there from the corn.
Yes.
And then we go back to corn, back to that. Because here it's corn, bean, corn, bean, corn, bean.
Yep.
Very seldom corn on corn here.
Mm-hmm.
Very seldom. Starting to do a little more of it because we're finding out we can do it.
Yep. Yep.
We're dry enough. We don't fight disease a terrible lot. And we have enough rotation that we don't fight the bugs.
And I get
so
those
heavily.
agronomic principles, and it comes down to economics too.
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah.
not forget about that.
Right.
But in a perfect Johnny Ferentz agronomy world, and we didn't have to worry about pests, we didn't have to worry about fungus coming in.
Yeah.
Strictly just worried about soil. 2 years of corn, 1 year of beans would fit the bill.
Gotcha. And so, okay, here's one. In our area, what's working very well for us is corn planted to wheat, planted to double. So we plant the corn in say 24, plant the wheat. It's planted in the fall. We cut it in June, and we immediately go in and put double crop soybeans in.
Yep.
And we raise pretty good double crop beans. I mean, this year was a good year. They made upper 20s to, that field made 46.
Yeah.
The project field. But, so it's one of those things where, and then we'll go back to corn and we'll follow that. ROI at pencil's fantastic as long as we are selective. One, about our rent agreement.
Yeah.
What share does the landowner get? Two, the ground it goes on. It has to be very productive ground to make that operate. But that seems to really be a good cycle, ROI and soil health wise, thus far from our observations on our farm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what we're seeing is the wheat requires less nitrogen, like a lot less. And we're going off based off of pulling soil tests. These tests right here that we're looking at were pulled from the testing of that. And so, oh man, we're going to have to do a 2-part.
It's all right.
We're going to have to do 2-part.
Yep.
So why are we seeing but wheat's a very carbon needy crop, isn't it? Or
It's very, very wide carbon to nitrogen ratio.
okay.
Very wide.
So
there's a lot of
corn
carbon
complementing the wheat, or is the wheat growing because it was? Why is the wheat doing so well planted into corn?
Well, I think you go back to that organic nitrogen.
And this is the test that it was done on.
Yeah, I mean, organic nitrogen, you had 30 pounds there.
Okay.
That's going to be a slow release. That plant's slowly going to feed on it.
Okay.
I get to the part 2. I mean, even on your soybean side, that rotation, if you think about that, is similar in my neck of the woods, 2 years corn, 1 year beans.
Okay.
Because you got a fibrous crop, 60-1 corn. You got wheat, which if you're taking it to harvest, don't quote me, but I think it's like 70s to 1. So it's higher.
Crazy high.
So then when you're bringing soybeans in, you're bringing it back down.
Sure.
I mean, you're literally utilizing the soybeans, you could argue as a cover, a profitable cover.
Right.
To
Soil balancing tool.
Yeah, a soil balancing tool in that situation. I actually love that.
Yeah.
We just have, in my neck of the woods, infrastructure problems of getting wheat out.
Right.
But that would be
climate.
Well, I mean, I got a customer that I've been scouting for 5+ years, and we had a soybean field that was half cover crop rye, and the other half didn't have it because it was held out corn. Okay. So half of it we cut for silage, the rest of it we picked for held on corn. So be it. Yeah. But the part that had rye on it, according to climate here 3 weeks ago, it was a 10 bushel difference.
Wow. Is that because the carbon?
The rye is producing carbon. And this is a CEC of 5. Sand.
Okay. Gotcha.
Which is you'd see a bigger benefit of your carbon because it processes it so fast.
So see, that's something that we're going to have to dive into in the part 2 is we have lots of guys that deal with sandy, low organic matter levels.
Yep.
And how do we help balance our nitrogen applications with carbon? How does carbon play into effect there? And then we've got very rich soils of the north and north and east. And then what do those guys struggle with? Because everyone's got different balances. Yeah. Everyone has different issues. Yes. Everyone has different blessings. Guys have water. Guys don't have water. Guys have good dirt. There's always a trade.
Yes.
Guys always have something that other guys aren't fighting. And people people bash, or no, I shouldn't say bash. It's a terrible term. I shouldn't say that. People dog on Iowa, Illinois, the I states, Indiana. Oh man, those guys, they just crank. Dude, from working with a bunch of guys from that region, they have their own set of struggles.
100%.
Very real struggles, that if you don't know, you can easily talk out of place because you don't have a freaking clue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, they have 250 bushel corn. Do you know what else they have? They have tar spot. They also they have sudden death syndrome in beans. They have crazy high rent prices. I mean,
yeah,
dude, it's just the offset thing. So, little side tangent, don't dog on other states and what they do because they have their own struggles.
Yep.
And
we're all just trying to do what we love.
We all are.
I mean,
quit dogging on people, man. Just there's enough of that.
Yes.
People just need to love each other. They just love each other. Anyway, okay, so we're going to cut it here.
Okay.
We're going to do a part 2.
Okay.
How can we affect low organic matters and even tie in? I'd say organic matter is something we should cover in regards to C to N, and then how we can be intentional with carbon and nitrogen applications on our farm. So stay tuned for part 2.
Part 2.
We'll be back. Guys, thanks for watching the content so far. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got all the full-length podcasts, other video information, tutorials on there. Also on all the major podcast platforms and social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So if you like this, go ahead and check more out on all those platforms.